Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, how you doing? Welcome into the program. Hopefully you are doing very, very well because, hey, we have a great show planned for you where we are talking to the one, the only, Nathan Evans, managing editor over at Popzara magazine. And if you would like to check them out, popzara.com. We'll have that in the show notes afterwards. We'll explain all that kind of stuff. But everyone, hey, hopefully, as I said, I woke up today, did some errands, did some stuff for the show here, and overall, I have not checked anything. So I hope everyone out there is happy, healthy. There's no disasters or anything, horrible out there that I should have mentioned, but I probably didn't. But in the meantime, why don't we go ahead and before we get started, computeramerica.com. That will have a link to our guest website, any articles that we talk about, any videos that we show, anything and everything that we reference in today's show, you can find at computeramerica.com. While you're there, be sure to check out some of our articles, reviews, things like that. Those are going up all the time, and we'll be sure to let you know. But in the meantime, everyone, happy that you could join us. Thank you for listening to us live on IRN, or if you're listening to us on the podcast, well, hey, that's the second best way to listen to us. So all that being said, why don't we go ahead, bring him on, waiting oh so patiently in the wings, none other, as I said before, longtime Computer America correspondent, Nathan Evans. Nathan, how you doing? Welcome back onto Computer America.
Hey, Ben, what's going on? By the way, we missed it this summer, but do you realize I've been doing this show for you for 5 years?
Yeah, I know, and all that money I paid you is really coming in handy, I bet.
Wait, money?
Yeah, I was giving it to Corey, and he was supposed to hand that over.
Oh, yeah, it's like when someone says, yeah, give me money for charity. Oh, what charity? Well, she's at the strip club.
Wow, you should definitely do your research. But 5 years, that's a heck of a run, and I can't believe it's it does not seem that long. That's crazy.
Well, some of those years you were not around. It was the other hosts.
Yeah, that's true.
But
there were other hosts and co-hosts and things like that. But you have seen a lot of change in Computer America, and we've seen a lot of change in Popzara. So all for the better.
Well, yeah, it's a net benefit, and it's a net benefit. No, but welcome back, and thank you for having me a little early. Going to be going on a trip this weekend, so I can't meet you at the normal time. I know your listeners are so sad, but
yeah, they're gonna have to reorient themselves because normally, if anyone would like to, hear Nathan Evans segments on a regular basis, normally last Friday of every month is what we shoot for. But you have a trip coming up, and we are more than happy to accommodate this show. Hey, Tuesdays as good as Friday, and we're happy to talk today. So with that being said, again, hopefully nothing else is going on with you. Why don't we go ahead and get started with today? Oh, actually, before we get started with that, we should give some background on anyone out there who maybe hasn't heard of Popzara, which, as you said, 5 years at this point. How the heck? But what is it that you guys strive to do with your editors? A lot of correspondents here on the show actually hail from Popzara as well. What do you strive for with Popzara?
Yeah, there's a lot of interoperability between us. I'll say this: no, Popzara, it's a fun little online website. As your dad Craig likes to say, it's a magazine. I won't argue that point. I love magazines. Hey kids, put the record player on. Watch the tube. No, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little pop culture, a little bit of fun. As you know, we deal with games, we deal with movies, we deal with technology, books, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I want to stress increasingly less politics because, frankly, there's too much of that in today's caustic, problematic environment. Try to focus on stuff that people want a distraction from because sometimes you need a distraction. And we have a dinosaur with a hat.
Yes, yes, your logo is definitely there, front and center on on many of your articles and reviews and things like that. And just looking at your website here, of course, the NPD numbers. You guys always do a very good breakdown of the monthly numbers and things like that. Hey, you're keeping the content flowing, everything from reviews to Rambo Last Blood. Hey, which I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked that nostalgia seems to be such a driving factor in so many of today's releases. So I don't know, but yeah, you have a lot of great content, so definitely go check that out.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of nostalgia, those who visit Popzara today, both right now and a little bit later, are going to get a double dose of it because we have reviews of the new Sega Genesis Mini Retro Console, and there will be a podcast of the Sega Genesis Retro Console starring Computer America favorites Corey and Herman.
Very,
So,
very cool. Actually, if you wouldn't mind starting there, we can just, kind of just jump right into that and,
sure.
segue from there. But, okay, so a little bit of background. My first console was a Nintendo 64. Second one was an Xbox. I missed everything before from the Sega Genesis to the Super Nintendo. Admittedly, I did go to other people's houses and things like that. I did get a chance to play with them myself, but I never really owned one. So the nostalgia is very limited. I'm hoping that you have a bit more, kind of hands-on experience with when, the Sega Genesis had its heyday. But what did this console mean for the industry when it came out way back when?
Sure. First of all, let's get the obvious out of the way. The Sega Genesis turned 30 years old this year. This not quite the 5-year anniversary of Computer America for me, but it's still pretty good. It's up there.
Right.
So the Sega Genesis came out in America, I believe, in August or July, one of those two dates. And the Sega Genesis Mini, which is a fully compact singular retro console, came out last week for $80. Contains 42 games, 2 of which you've never played because they didn't exist a couple years ago. They were made for the console. But generally speaking, a nice, healthy buffet selection of the best of Sega Genesis 16-bit machine. So, by the way, how come every time people talk about gaming nostalgia, it sounds like a Penthouse forum? Like, my first time was with the NES. And it's just, they treat it like it's a sexual episode. And I think that's, I'm kind of being funny. I'm being funny.
Well, no.
But it means so much to people.
I will say it's kind of like the first time you heard a song or the first time that you had a certain kind of food or something. Just that memory really takes you back. That's what nostalgia is. It takes you back to your first experience.
Well, and for the Sega Genesis, it's actually more critical because the Sega Genesis represented one of the first times in consumer pop culture history of which there was sort of a fevered passion for an electronic device that we didn't usually see. We usually saw that associated with sports teams, right? Especially those who live in regional areas like college basketball or football. But with the Genesis, you basically had for the first time since I would say the mid 80s, you had this division of consumer appreciation for a device that wasn't Nintendo. Again, Nintendo dominated the entire video game industry in a way that no one had ever seen before. They effectively raised the industry from the ashes of a huge catastrophic breakdown. And what happened is the Genesis had come out in 1989. It didn't do very well. It was not a very popular unit. It wasn't until Sonic the Hedgehog came out a few years later that people started taking notice, of which Sega reorganized, restructured, and became a real competitor. And one of the ways they did this was by making these outlandish commercials that were big boy commercials, if that makes any sense.
Big boy commercials, like mature or like not targeting the usual, kids audience? Oh no. Oh no. No. Let's see. Nathan, can you hear me? Well, that's not good. Let's see. Hopefully, everyone out there, if you can hear me, I apologize for this. Just one moment. We seem to have been disconnected, so hopefully, there we go. Nathan, can you hear me?
I'm back. Are you there?
Perfect. Yes. Looks like we had an almost complete disconnect here on our computer, but hey, we're back up. We're running. We're doing good. So I apologize. We kind of lost you right there when you said they came out with these commercials, and
the commercials are pretty much for targeting like angsty male gamers in a way. That whereas Nintendo was all bip and bop and censorship, the Genesis was more hard edged. Like, we're cool, we're big, we're big. Got to get Genesis. Genesis does what Nintendo. They were very creative and they were a lot of fun. And looking back now, they're a little annoying, but at the time they were pretty revolutionary. And they had a lot of celebrities. And they were basically, let's get Genesis because this is where the big boys play. And that created not just a divide, but that also created what we now call the console wars, where people actually took sides. And it continues to this day, by the way, with PlayStation, Xbox, PC, Nintendo stuff. Continues to this day, although we are seeing a consolidation of that, where companies are now starting to play nice, and which is going to culminate in what I think is actually the biggest innovation of the year, with the upcoming Call of Duty game, which just had a beta over the weekend. The new Call of Duty game will be cross-platform between Xbox and PlayStation.
I saw that.
That's a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
like that's a really, really, really big deal.
It's a big deal, and really, it just seems to me it's a big deal because I guess a lot of people have been asking, what the heck took so long? Why is this such a big deal? Because the networking capability was there, but the initiative was not taken by a lot of these companies. And of course, you can blame Xbox and PlayStation, blah blah blah. But yeah, about time.
Well, the idea was that you could strangle your competition by forbidding competition to be on them, which is something Nintendo did. Nintendo had this policy where officially licensed third-party developers could not develop for other systems. So you'd have to see all sorts of chicanery to get those games on other platforms. That ended in 1992, by the way. And what happened was you see a flood of developers. And I want to say this. The Genesis Mini is pretty great. If you like Genesis or if you like 16-bit history, please get it. I will say this, though. You're asking what it meant for the industry. Most important thing about the Genesis we take away from it. One, I would caution your listeners, and I love this story, to go look at the history of development on the Genesis and what it represented as for the gaming industry as a whole. On paper, Ben, the Genesis was not a very powerful machine. It was pretty much built from off the parts, a lot of which were recycled from Commodore 64 machines,
right?
Including most of its peripheral ports. So you had developers who wanted a challenge. They wanted to take advantage of hardware. So what they would do is they would find new ways to trick the machine into doing things it wasn't designed for. You had software tricks, you had hardware tricks, you had all sorts of things. And they were able to make this console do and perform in ways that would have been impossible had it first come out. And that really is a metaphor for technology today, where we're told that, oh, you need a new Xbox One X, you need a new PC, you need a new video card, you need all this stuff. And meanwhile, you have something like the Nintendo Switch, which we were told when it came out. You remember this. We were told, oh, the Switch can't handle Doom, can't handle first-person shooters, it can't handle Overwatch. But yeah, here they are. Because it's fun. It's fun to watch developers flex their muscle and to see what they can do when they actually try.
Yeah, and by the way, I saw a nice little article explaining why this is so interesting, and like the question that is asked all the time is, why can't we have emulators, or why can't we have something that you download on a regular PC and you could play these things? And it's like, you could do that, but there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you were mentioning some of those hardware tricks, some of those software design tricks that they had. One of the ways is, I guess it was like the clock speed or like the screen refresh rate. The games were actually tied to the refresh rate. And here, or rather, the cycle speed. I'm sure there's a better word for it. But anyways, it was tied to this, and they could time how many frames would load, how fast things would be played. They were doing these special tricks so that they could get more out of the machine. And like, let's say if you just ported it over, ported the source code over to a PC. The clock speed of your average PC nowadays is thousands of times faster than a Sega Genesis was back then. So
yes.
Games would then play thousands of times faster. Like enemies would shoot at you instead of once every 10 frames. They would shoot at you 10,000 times every second.
But that's only half of it. I mean, that's emulation in theory, but you also have struggles with specific hardware. Again, the Genesis was off the wall parts. It's almost like an old PC used to be. You had its you had its distinctive sound processor, which is I think was FM, some sort of FM processor. It's hard to emulate. It's really hard to
Yeah.
emulate, and it's really hard to emulate all this stuff at once because again, the Genesis was basically designed. Genesis games were essentially designed at some point to run on basically a Rube Goldberg machine. Like things were happening in a way that it wasn't designed to be. So it had to rely on physical hardware tricks, physical cycling, physical this, physical that, and even Sega to the point. Even Sega had difficulty emulating their own software, and that's what makes the Genesis Mini so interesting. Is because this is not the first time this has been attempted. There's been many, 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 many attempts to emulate the Genesis in a retro console, and they've all been failures because they're just not right. Sound wouldn't work, graphics wouldn't work.
And by the way, we had the company that released, I think it was a couple months ago or like last holiday season, the company that made the Super Nintendo, kind of mini console, very, very similar to this. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same company behind it, but they, when they were talking about how they ported some of these games or how they got some of these games, it was very interesting to hear from the guy, trying to coordinate the whole thing, because he said that like some of the games, they're so old and just no one kept copies of them. And of course, there's a difference between the copy that you buy as a consumer and the copy that the developers work on. They actually called one of the old developers who worked on one of the games, and he had a backup of the developer version on floppy disk somewhere in his house, and that's how they were able to port it, because no one else had the original developer's copy to actually make the game. And I would not be surprised with 40 different games if something very similar happened, where a lot of these games just they weren't even available for emulation. They just weren't ever available until now.
No, that's exactly true. There was no like archival effort made to protect the integrity of these things. And also, I do want to go back to what I mentioned before, is that today I noticed I had a new update for my GeForce card, of course, right? Because lo and behold, something's coming out. But we hear this all the time with ray tracing, with bit mapping, with all this stuff. You need this. Today, by the way, one of the stories we're going to talk about is the new PlayStation is going to be detailed a little bit more today, from what we understand. Mm-hmm. We got to get this, we got to get faster this. But what makes the Genesis so interesting is that on paper it's garbage. It's not a very good hardware. It's very primitive, but yet it was able to survive because the ingenuity of the ingenuity and sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? The ingenuity of the developers were also programmers, were also hardware people. So they had supreme knowledge of these tools they were creating. And today you see game engines like Unreal Engine. You see what's the other one? What's Unity?
Yeah.
You see these engines come out left and right, and you're seeing a bigger divide between developer programmer. They're not the same thing anymore. You know what I mean? They're not the same thing. And then you see a bigger divide between art creator and programmer and developer. So you have these multiple teams, and none of them are all working together because none of them have their hands in all the honeypots. And so you have these big giant machines that have massive performance issues. You have games that don't work the way they should, and they're just not impressive in the way the Genesis was. Like when you play a Genesis game in 1994, for example, in 1995, some games had full motion video, 3D polygons, sprite manipulation, CD quality sound. Like that wasn't available in 1989. These were completely generated by talented people who really wanted to test themselves, and it's impressive. It's impressive the way they were able to do that. And I don't think I've seen a single game on my expensive PC that impresses me 1/10 of what something like Gunstar Heroes did. Or to be fair, even this sort of hubris eventually went its way to the Nintendo Super Nintendo when you had things like Donkey Kong Country or Yoshi's Island. You have games that were not supposed to play on this hardware, but yet here they are. And so again, I think modern developers could learn a lot from the Genesis development. I think they should. I don't think you should be allowed to make a game without studying the Genesis. That's all I gotta say.
Okay, no, and of course, let's see. So you can pre-order it. I think this is probably again one of those like I said, I think last year was the
pre-order. I got one sitting in front of me right now. You could go to Walmart right now and pick it up.
Look,
Right
I'm
now.
just
What are you doing?
I'm just
What are
reading the
you doing?
website. I'm just reading the
Turn this
website.
off. Turn this podcast off. Turn this show off, and go to Walmart and buy a Genesis Mini. What are you waiting for?
Okay,
No,
so
it's there right now. It came out last week.
okay, so they need to update their website. That's not my fault. That's their fault. But
That's true.
I will say that last year was the Super Nintendo. This year's the Sega Genesis. I think that like every year, I think this company behind these ports and these console reconstructions, they're going to come up with another one. And
There's another one.
yeah.
There's another one coming.
Have they announced it?
Yeah, it's coming out, and I'm really excited. I'm actually more excited about this one than I am anything else. You know what
Yeah?
it's called?
What's
It's
that?
the Turbo Graphics Mini.
Turbo Graphics Mini.
It's
What the heck?
It's gonna be released by a different company, by Konami. Konami, of course, is most famous for series like Contra, Metal Gear Solid, and Konami picked up the licensing rights to the original TurboGrafx release, which was Hudson Soft, and they're creating a TurboGrafx Mini. Now, it's even less known than the Genesis, but no less important. And hopefully, we can talk a little bit more about the TurboGrafx when it comes out. But
When it comes out,
I'm
right?
very, very excited about the TurboGrafx.
Okay,
Very, very excited.
very, very interesting. So, there you go, Sega Genesis Mini. And by the way, you have here in the notes that you have a podcast out, or you're going to make a podcast with Corey and.
Yeah, we recorded it the other day. It's in the process of post production. So as soon as my producer gets it up, it should be up today. In fact, it might be up before we're done talking. But the Genesis Mini review is up should be up right now, or will be soon. So
definitely,
that's a tie-in. That's a tie-in.
Yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that, and we'll put a link in the show notes. But speaking of tie-ins, we have a couple of other ones, although I'm very interested about the PlayStation, and it looks like just talking about Sony could take a bit of time. So why don't we talk about the PlayStation 5 and, just
Sure.
console to console? Yeah.
I will say this. It should be going on while we're talking. That Sony is going to be having a live stream. They basically moved their stuff over to what Nintendo does with their tree houses and their Nintendo Directs. And I do want to talk about this a little bit before we end up about the relevance of trade shows.
Sure.
But Sony's going to be having a State of Play event. I believe it's happening right now while we're talking. So they should be announcing new software. They should be announcing more about the PlayStation 5. I know they're supposed to be talking about The Last of Us Part 2 and a few other things. So unfortunately, listeners, it's kind of all speculation right now. But you'll probably know more than we do.
Yeah, well, and of course, before we start talking about I guess the State of Play, and like you said, Nintendo has their own thing, and I'm sure Microsoft isn't too far behind. Why don't we go ahead and jump into PlayStation 5, the specs and the efficiency, that kind of thing, and then we'll circle back around to the State of Play.
Sure. I will say one thing, though. A little shame on Sony for being a little exploitive. As we all know, there was a climate change rally this weekend, and people care very much about this issue. So, of course, everybody and their brother and sister are trying to hop on board to get a little free publicity. Sony put out a little blurb that the PlayStation 5 is going to be a lot more efficient. It's going to be energy efficient. They said they're joining forces with the United Nations to combat climate change. Like, just barf. It's just when I hear that, no, because that ridicules the climate change conversation in a way that's not very helpful. And so, yeah.
And I know, like you said, with Popzara, you're trying to steer away from politics, but I will say that this one particular issue is something that I totally appreciate when companies tried to have a green initiative. That's great. But I don't like it when they use it as kind of like a selling point for that consumers. It's like, oh, keep playing our console and you'll save the planet. It's like,
like that's like I said, we could have a serious conversation and we could agree on a lot of things. But when I hear this kind of thing, it doesn't sit well with me. And so, especially since it's going to be an opt-in procedure where the PlayStation 5 is supposed to run more economically, which basically you and I both know means runs like crap. And so that's what it usually means. It means slower. It means slower. This use less energy. These consoles have had these features for years. You've seen this. PlayStation 4 has had it. Xbox One have had it, where they run more energy efficient. They don't consume as much energy when they're in standby mode and everything, and it's nothing new.
Yeah, no, nothing new. So this article that you have here, it's all about energy efficiency, but that was going to happen anyways. That is the nature of technology. Things get smarter, more efficient, and of course use less power. And by smarter, I mean more powerful. So this was to be expected, but like you said, they just decided to release this because it's timely. Yeah, the whole joining forces with the United Nations. So, but hey, PlayStation 5. So nothing really, kind of new that we're getting about the PlayStation 5. Sometime in 2020. So obviously, probably the latter half of 2020, we're still expecting both a PlayStation, and I think we're also expecting whatever Project Scarlet turns out to be. We're gonna have another year with two brand new consoles, right?
That's the thinking. Again, Sony and Microsoft both run on the same cycle, pretty much. They share a lot of development. They share a lot of development talent, and of course, because of their reliance on third parties, they have to come out within the same cycle. The PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, both launched in November of 2013. So this is kind of due. And the reason it feels like it's too soon is because they both had iterative updates with the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X, both of which I believe were uh, they were mistakes. I believe that what they did is they disassociated the upgrade cycle, and
Mm.
so what Sony and Microsoft have to do is they have to provide a quantum leap forward in performance,
It's-
and I don't think that's going to happen, and I think Microsoft realizes this more than Sony. I've said this before. I think Microsoft is looking for an exit strategy, and I think that's pretty much been confirmed with the way they handled the way they're going to handle the new Xbox, with software distribution on Windows and
yeah.
Xbox in parallel. But the PlayStation's a big seller. PlayStation 4 sold close to somewhere upwards of 100 million consoles. That's
Hmm.
a lot. That's a lot. And Sony has a lot to lose. I think the PlayStation 5, there's a lot of interest simply because it's a new PlayStation. And I think they deserve that. I think the PlayStation is an exciting console, and I think I want to see what's going to happen too. And I do like some of the things I see. But at the end of the day, is it just going to be a more powerful console? And I don't see anything that's going to uh, dissuade me of that.
Well,
Uh,
and it really does seem like they are taking the Apple route, and as much as we like to pick on Apple, they certainly have
pick
transitioned
pick
over.
on Apple. I see what you did.
Yeah, well, they have transitioned from this idea that every year there's going to be and one more thing, and then something that's going to knock your socks off. It looks like over the past, at least this console generation, consoles are going to get 15 to 20% better every time they come out with a new console. You can expect it. You can set your clock to it. It's just going to happen. And this next one, it might be exactly that. I doubt that there's going to be any kind of super support for virtual reality. I doubt there's going to be any kind of super support for anything that would be, as you said, a quantum leap or a revolutionary. But why I say they're like Apple, especially PlayStation, video games, and really just this entertainment system as a service, as a service, as a service, as a
Yeah,
service.
exactly. Yeah,
That's where
exactly.
everyone's making their money, and that's where everyone is trying to just either cram it in or transition as fast as they can to the as a service model because
Well,
it's much more reliable.
well, when we talked about Call of Duty being cross-platform, and I said that was important, I didn't mean that just because it's fun. I mean that because it Sony needs to. Uh, Sony's missed out. They've been very publicly the face of resistance to this sort of thing. Where we had games like Rocket Knight League and we had Fortnite and Minecraft that were cross-platform between iPhones and Xboxes and Switches. Sony was left out of the party. And here's the thing, though: when you have games as a platform, you don't need to have a PlayStation to play Call of Duty anymore or things like that. And increasingly, games are going over to multi-platform. In some cases, platform agnostic with things like Stadia and
Hmm.
whatever Microsoft and EA is doing. Um, it's worth noting that this very week, or the past 7 days, speaking of Apple, Apple has released Apple Arcade, which is a all-you-can-eat buffet of exclusive titles for iOS devices.
Yeah.
And then Google announced they're going to have some version of it as well. Microsoft did it kind of first. Microsoft did Game Pass, which is excellent, which I think is game changing, and I think it's important, and I think that's revolutionary when you're now incentivizing people to play games not per game but per service. We want to keep you hooked, but at the same time, offering you a lot of value. I have not played Apple Arcade, but I can tell you this. Our own good friend Corey Gallagher is a senior games editor, who's notoriously not into mobile games. I talked to him last night. He loves Apple Arcade. He thinks the games are outrageously good.
Very, very
And
interesting. But I will say, Nathan, let's go ahead and hit the pause button right there. And everyone, we're going to be right back. We have commercials playing, and then we will be right back with Nathan Evans, Popzara. Everyone, stay tuned. More Computer America right after this. We'll be right back.
Mhm.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
And welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour as we continue on here. And everyone, by the way, if you miss any part of today's show, wherever podcasts are heard, after the program, after live on IRN, you can, of course, listen to us on all of them: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, so on and so forth. Everyone, please go check that out. Now, with that being said, we continue on. Popzara, Nathan Evans, managing editor, and of course, we continue on with our conversation about this idea of, well, hey, gaming as a service. And I think that, honestly, we could transition this conversation just a little bit and talk about, of course, you mentioned it with Apple with Apple Arcade, and you were about to give Corey's first impressions, but also Google Play Pass and Stadia and things like that, where video games, and by the way, just so everyone knows, the reason why video games are so popular among younger people is that it's the best value proposition you have as either a kid or as a parent buying a game for a kid. A movie, let's say it costs $10 to get in, and it lasts 2 hours, that costs $5 an hour. A video game, you could buy it for $60 traditionally, although, like I said, we're about to move business models. $60, and you could easily, if the game is good, which is why reviews are so important for video games, you could easily get 100, 200, 300 hours out of it, which then brings it down to like 60 cents an hour. It is just, as far as pop culture and entertainment, video games reign supreme, and it looks like they're getting even more inexpensive, hopefully with this, with games as a service. So sorry to kind of step on you there, Nathan, but as I said, games as a service, Apple Arcade. What was Corey's? Like you said, he wasn't into mobile games, but
he did. Yeah, he's not big into mobile games. He's it's funny because Corey, as you probably know, he's a big PC guy. He's willing to spend over $1,000 on a video card, which he has, and he needs the latest and greatest, and he loves all that. But he's also a big retro fan, and he's not a big mobile game. He's an iPhone user. He's got Apple TV, but he's not a big mobile game fan. But he himself has told me that he loves the Apple Arcade. He said many of the games hit the spot. And they look great. They play great. And for your listeners, one of the key features of this is that Apple has finally done something pretty cool. They've allowed you to use your Xbox One and DualShock 4 controllers on Apple products. So you can now pair your Xbox controllers and your DualShocks directly to your Apple device. And it's funny. I did this just before we talked today, but Apple just updated Apple TV and iPad today, and now they have Apple Arcade.
Oh, okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, they. I know that a lot of people were kind of like, well, Apple put Apple Arcade at the very beginning of their most recent hardware announcements, and they put it at the beginning because otherwise people really wouldn't stick around for it. But they did show off some really cool titles that showed that Apple doesn't see Apple Arcade as just kind of this passing fancy. No, this is going to be the what drives a certain segment of their consumers. This is what's going to drive kind of more people to buy into Apple.
Well, I'm no stranger to criticizing Apple when they do lackluster, sloppy work, which they've pretty much been doing a long time. But I kind of predicted this back in 2015 when they launched their new Apple TV at the time, and they made a lackluster effort to get into the gaming industry, which they had all the pieces ready. They announced something called MFI controllers, which you could do third-party controllers. There were actual games on Apple TV that were available, including new versions of Rayman and games by Harmonix that were pretty good. It just never happened, and it was very crushing because here you have Apple, the biggest company in the world. Everything was in place. They had hired the right people. Everything was in place, but they made no effort to do it. And it was crushing. It was disappointing because it's always terrible to see companies with so much financial privilege just drop the ball. It didn't need to happen. Apple could have been a player in the game industry. Yeah, they could have competed. They could have filled that niche left by the original Wii, but they didn't. They dropped the ball. Apple Arcade seems to go a long way to fix that. And if they're going to basically mimic what Microsoft did with Game Pass, I think that's a good idea. Something's going to happen. We're in the middle of a sea change right now. We're in the middle of a sea change. And again, you have new Xboxes and PlayStations coming next year. You have Google's whatever the hell it is, streaming Stadia thing.
Yeah.
But the fact is that we're looking at games not, like you said, not as individual purchases, but as services. And I don't know if I like that, but I might have to accept that.
It needs to and you could probably make the case for PC and for Xbox and console and things like that, but for mobile, let's face it, mobile has gotten such a bad reputation since the inception of a mobile game that if it's not if the game doesn't somehow trick you into spending $150 in microtransactions, it's hailed as a revolutionary mobile game. Like, the mobile game scene has been so dead because it seems like everyone who and obviously I come from a point of view of someone who does play a lot of PC games and doesn't just kind of hears a lot of the reputation of mobile games. They are money grabs, they are low effort, they are derivative, they just are not interesting or good. And I think with something like Apple Arcade, you don't have to worry about that. And although, to be fair, I had this question when I first heard about Apple Arcade. I'm not sure if there are going to be microtransactions within the games that are part of the service.
No,
that's
a selling point. There are no microtransactions. There's no in-app purchases. You play all you want on any device. There's cross-platform saves. Once you have the service, you have the game. That's a requirement.
Okay.
And to be fair, I did kind of disagree a little bit. This is one of those things where, when you talk to people, you have to be aware. This is the effect of what I was talking about the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, is that there's a latent prejudice that still exists in the game industry, where, like, the way we're talking about mobile, we're talking about it as it's some sort of alien being, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, mobile gaming makes more money than console gaming.
Yeah.
It's far more profitable, just from things like Fortnite and Pokemon Go alone. Not to mention Candy Crush and all this. You know what's coming out next week on mobile? Call of Duty. a real Call of Duty. You have these things. Mario Kart is coming out next week on iOS. Like even Nintendo is doing this. I mean, yeah, it's a little skeezy how they do this, but console games have been doing skeeziness for a while as well.
Hmm.
In fact, loot boxes on console games have been the subject of criticism and legislation efforts
Yeah.
to sort of to trigger them away. So, but again, people play mobile gaming a lot, a lot. They just happen to not obsess over it in the way console gamers do. And you see that prejudice. It's just transferred to mobile
It,
versus
it
home gaming.
it's also it's also a different market. I mean, I'm sure
Hmm.
that you with you with your constant surveillance of the NPD numbers and things like that, and I'm not sure if they track the Chinese numbers, but the Chinese market alone, when you look at the size of the mobile gaming market over there, you can see why every traditional video game developer has to have a mobile game of some sort.
That's the thing. You got companies like Tencent and other Chinese developers who have become huge players in the mobile market, where they're now developing Disney games and Marvel games. They're two different markets, but they're all part of the same pie. You know what I mean? It's like a pizza you get at Domino's, where everybody. It's like that. Is it Domino's or is it Little Caesars, where everybody gets to decide their topping?
Yep,
So you have
that's Little Caesars. I'm
Yeah, so
hungry now.
that's what that's what the gaming industry is. It's a part of the same pizza, but there's tangential links. There's like concentric circles between the two. And when you have things that bridge that divide, for example, Apple Arcade lets you play on Mac, iPad, iPhone, Apple TV. You get Google, which I don't really know. I think Google just slapped this together. You have Game Pass, which allows you to play between console and PC. You have Stadia, which allows you to play between devices. You have this reformation that the platform is relevant. In the same way when you say, "Oh, nobody watches movies on their phone." Yes, they do. Yes, they do a lot. In fact, more people may watch movies on their phone than TV. And
I,
so,
I, I'm almost positive that more people consume YouTube videos on their
yeah.
phones than people watch TV in their home. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it reminds me back in the early 2000s of which you had these high quality audio services like HD, DVD audio, and
Yeah.
Super CD, where you got the CD and the sound quality is unquestionably better than MP3s. But in order to enjoy it, you had to have a nice expensive stereo. You had to have nice speakers. You're going to drop at least $1,000. Whereas MP3s, you just bloop and put them. They were cheap. MP3s won the battle because of their flexibility and ease of use between devices. You could play an MP3 on your computer, on your player, and nowadays you can play MP3s on your watch. But the fact of the matter is that software. When we say software as a service, I think it's got a bad ring of the old days of which you had to pay for everything. But I think what they're really doing, Ben, is that we're talking more like the Netflix model, where the
Yeah.
software will be distributable between different devices. And there will be holdouts, by the way. For example, Nintendo just launched their new Switch last week, the Switch Lite, which basically removes the entire being of the Switch, which it no longer switches to a home console. It's just portable. But research shows that a lot of people only play games mobile. So for those people, that will be fine.
Yeah.
A review is coming. I can tell you that my editor really likes it, and so. But this is what's going to happen. We're going to start seeing this sort of thing happen,
I
and
I will also point to another example, and of course, this is what's been taking up a lot of my time. World of Warcraft Classic just came out a couple of weeks ago, and the way that they tied it in, and you could talk about subscription numbers and things like that. But I guess the best way they found to get people to play the game was to give you World of Warcraft Classic if you had an active World of Warcraft retail subscription. And, hey, so for the same subscription you would get for one game, they're giving you a second for,
Sure.
quote unquote free.
Well, and don't forget, you also have these other little things like you have the emerging Epic Game Store, which is a huge competitor to
Yeah.
to Valve's Steam. You also have UPlay, you have EA Origins, and all of these services are just. I don't want to say again. I want to use the word correctly, but they are giving you quote unquote free games if you decide to invest in their service.
Yeah.
And here's the problem, though, and here's my final say on this. The problem with proprietary exclusive things, for example, is that you got to be careful when you invest money. And so, for example, this Stadia thing coming out from Google, it's not what I would call optimal, and I'm not going to criticize it. I have used the service, and it works fundamentally okay. But the fact is that would you spend $60 to buy a game on Stadia versus spending $60 to buy it on your PC? And at the end of the day, what happens is that if Stadia goes away, and if Google's track record is to be believed, it probably will. Then what happens to your investment? And the answer is tough cookies. It's gone.
Yeah.
Whereas if you buy the game on an Xbox or anything, it used to be you had a disc, right? A DVD or a Blu-ray, whatever. But now most people buy their games on PC digitally, right? So you're spending money at Steam. You're spending money at Itch.io. You're spending money at whatever. So you're not really buying the game the way you think you are either.
About 3 weeks ago, I would have been completely on board, and I wouldn't have said anything, to add to the conversation. But I will say that after, all my friends were getting psyched up for World of Warcraft Classic, and they were like, and they were all shopping for new computers. Every single one of them, and this is just my social circle, but I'm extrapolating it to, essentially what I know. That's what everyone else does.
It's good data. Data's data.
Right, and everyone I know, they haven't updated their computer until there was something worth updating for, or something that they really wanted. And that's, I think, the hole that Stadia is looking to fill, in that you don't have to upgrade. You could just sign into our service, and that piece of crap computer that you have is going to run all the games.
I can confirm for you that we used the beta of Stadia last year. I can confirm we got that thing to run on a $100 Chromebook.
Yeah.
Right? And it ran well. But here's the thing. So the technology will work. The problem becomes the implementation. And that's really what I was saying. Apple had everything going for them. They were a company that could afford to do this. They did not do what mattered, and they failed. Google is in a similar position. They're a company with untold wealth, untold privilege, untold access. They can do this. It's not a matter of if you can, it's will you. Will you do what it takes to make this work? Because, again, it's not just a matter of putting hardware out there. Trust me, you want to have some fun on a weekend? Go look at the history of video game hardware and consoles. It's littered with abject failures, littered with them. There's more dead consoles than there are dead people. And so the problem is, will Google do the things? And it bothers me because, again, we have Google versus Roku. What was more successful, Google TV or Roku? What was more successful in software, Android or iOS? What's more successful? You have these things, and you see time and time again Google drops the ball because they don't understand the meat of what makes these services run. I'm hoping for the best for Stadia. If it is going to change the game, I'm all for it. But they need to understand why they need to exist. Netflix succeeded because they got it right. You know what I mean? Netflix succeeded because they got it right. We shall see.
Right.
We're going to see what happens. Disney's got their own channel coming out soon. Disney's in a position like Google. They're rich. They're famous. They have all the leverage. Are they going to do it right? I don't know. I want to see. Same with Apple, by the way. I will say last thing about Apple. So they have their TV service coming out, Apple Plus. Is it Apple Plus? Apple TV Plus? Whatever it's called.
Apple TV Plus. Yep.
They're doing one thing very interesting, and this is my last comment, is that they're giving the channel away if you buy an Apple product for a year. That's interesting. See, that's different. That makes a lot of sense. Like, you buy an Apple product, you get Apple TV. Okay, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, it was a nice little tie-in. I mean, really, when you look at an Apple product and you're spending at most $1,450 for a phone, or at most, let's say, $30,000 for a single computer. I mean, Apple's still very expensive, but they'll give you a $60 thing for free. Hey, at least it gets the foot in the door. It may, in the grand scheme of things, it may not mean too much, but I do like the fact that Apple, of all companies, is looking at interoperability, not with others, but at least with its own products, which they have not done in the past. So that's definitely good.
Exactly. That's, to me, that's a huge thing. Like, when I heard the pricing for Apple TV and I saw what they're doing in Apple Arcade, that's the first sign of life that I've seen from Apple.
I didn't expect it. I never heard anyone expected that low. I mean, they're coming at $4.99 for both. It was very impressive.
It's the pricing is fantastic, but again, it's the idea that you get at least with Apple TV, you get the service when you buy an Apple product. This is what companies like Apple need to do. They need to leverage what they can do and not just try to be what everyone else already is, because. Again, it's like I've said this before. Microsoft is discontinuing Edge browser on Windows 10, which is a total mistake, and they're replacing it with this derivative fork of Chrome. why would I want to use their version of Chrome when I already have Chrome? Like, you need to incentivize me. You need to give me something that I don't already have. I don't want redundancy in my collection. I want something new or better, or at least innovate in a way that's different. And
Yeah.
by the way, to tie this all up, and that's why we had something like the Sega Genesis back in the day, even though there was superior hardware, because they tried harder and it showed. And to be honest with you, I kind of see that on display when I see Nintendo Switch now. I see developers trying harder, and when you try harder, it's apparent, and it supersedes things like graphics and fidelity sometimes. Not always. I mean, we like those things too, but you feel like they want your money more. They appreciate you. They may be trying to sell you, but they're trying, and that typically should be rewarded.
Yeah, and kind of like we mentioned on this show and other shows, Apple is moving to a service company. That's why they killed iTunes. That's why now you can buy everything that iTunes used to do in one package. You can now subscribe to like 4 different services. Hey, and honestly, it's probably a good change. As much as people are getting a little sick and tired of subscribing to everything on a month-to-month basis, it's just people just tend to do it. It's just the psychology of it all. So with that being said, and by the way, we had another story here. I think we're just going to, kind of gloss over it. Apple TV is coming out with an update for multiple user support. So, hey.
Oh, I just updated my TV about 5 minutes before we talked today. It's there. Apple Arcade's on your Apple TV, multi-users. The interface is really nice. I got to tell you, Apple, I criticize you when you're terrible, but you have not been terrible this month.
And of course, Craig would strike me down if I didn't mention that. I'm sure that update came in at the same time as the iOS 13 update. So
no.
Well,
actually came a couple days later.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 days later. But the iOS 13 update also came out on the 19th, if I'm not mistaken. So be sure to update your devices. If nothing else, it seemed like the big update was dark mode. Dark mode.
You know what? It sounds stupid because everything else is dark mode, but I got to tell you, as someone with bad eyes, I love dark mode on iOS. It's really nice. It looks cool.
I'm shocked that dark mode, isn't the default for every website. Like, hey, that's why we updated the Computer America website, was because I was working on it for so much, and I was like, all this white, it's annoying me. That's why we switched over to quote unquote dark theme. So
I'll just say this. Again, we've said this before. I've been notoriously critical of Apple, at least over the past year, because of what I felt is just a lack of effort. And I think you would agree. I think a lot of people would agree. Of course. But when they do good work, they need to be rewarded as well. And they've done a really good job of this. And I think the next year, I'll tell you this, 2020 is going to be a very interesting year for 2 things. It's going to be a very interesting year showing us a snapshot of the future of software. And it's going to be very interesting politically. And so which one are you going to be sick of first? I don't know. Figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a little bit of time left, and if we want to circle back real quick, I was looking at some of the updates for the PlayStation 4 State of Play, and really all they really showed were a lot of different games, and, I guess it makes sense, the State of Play. They have some announcements, let's see, including the Last of Us 2 trailer. If anyone out there is very interested, The Last of Us was a very well-received game, so obviously...
Yeah, it was the best Resident Evil game that wasn't Resident Evil. So
yeah, and so The Last of Us 2 was going to spark interest regardless, and it looks like the trailer's out there if you want to go check that out. They also have a limited edition Death Stranding PlayStation 4 Pro, so pushing a little bit more of that hardware out before the PlayStation 5. I still don't know what Death Stranding's about, but
it's about crazy things happening.
Yeah, and
babies.
Yeah, and screaming babies. Let's see. So looking at some of the other updates here. Let's see. They have some stuff on embargo that's going to be lifted. Blah blah blah. They had, of course, the Call of Duty being cross-platform. They showed off a lot of different games and sneak peeks. Essentially, their lineup for the holidays and what games you're going to be able to play. So
here's the thing, though. E3 has become largely irrelevant, and I wanted to talk about that, but we don't have time. But I will say this, look for Sony and Microsoft both to unveil their new consoles. From what I understand, from what I've talked to from people, they're going to be almost indistinguishable from each other hardware-wise. It's going to be very, very much on pair with each other. Mm-hmm. And so the idea will be, how will they sell these, what will distinguish the PlayStation from the Xbox? And I don't think they figured that out yet. I don't think they figured out how to sell them.
I think that the difference will be PlayStation 5 is like their marketing strategy is you love the PlayStation 4, so buy the PlayStation 5. And I feel like Microsoft's strategy is going to be you have a Windows PC, so why not get something that operates with a Windows PC, get an Xbox, whatever, Scarlet, whatever it's going to be. I feel like that's going to be the two selling points. And yeah,
I think
we'll see how it
exactly. I'll say this though: I would not be surprised if Sony unveils their own version of Game Pass or their Apple Arcade, like all you can eat. I think it's time.
PlayStation, well, they had a certain service. I'm trying to remember what PlayStation.
That's crap. You talking about PS Plus or just now? PS Now.
PS Now, but they did give you like 1 or 2 games a month for free, which is essentially what they need to do, for everything.
It wasn't free. It's not free if you pay for it.
It comes included, and then they yank it away a month later. So
they still do. They still do that actually.
Yeah.
And so does Xbox Live. What's funny is I will say this for your listeners: Xbox Live Ultimate, the Game Pass Ultimate, actually an interesting deal if you're really into the Microsoft world. It gives you Game Pass on Xbox, on Windows, and Xbox Live in with just one bill. If you're really into Xbox, that's a pretty good deal. And but again, we shall see what happens. I think Game Pass is revolutionary. I think it's the best thing Microsoft's ever done. That and Play Anywhere. I would love to see Sony counter. I got to tell you this: if Sony comes out with a deal like that, where you can play all new PlayStation games as they come out, that's devastatingly effective.
Yeah,
and I think they know it. I think they know it. So,
well, it's effective because it's what people want. So let's hope that they do it. And of course, speaking of, and here's the last transition I'll kind of do, because like I said, the new Xbox console, the way that they're going to do it is that they're going to say, hey, you already have a Windows 10 computer, and I should probably even break that down a little bit more and say you probably already have a Windows 10 device, because even though they got out of the smartphone game, they still make tablets, they still have computers everywhere, laptops, so on and so forth. And like what Stadia does, if you have a beefy computer at home, I would not be surprised if an example of what, like the technology behind Stadia, I would not be surprised if you could somehow do that, where you could play your video game on your home PC and stream it to any other Windows 10 device that you may have, be it the Xbox console or whatever.
You don't forget, Microsoft has their own version of Stadia coming out. They showed it off at E3 last year. EA has their own version of it coming out. Of course, NVIDIA has their own version, which has already been out. Like this is not new technology. Again, Stadia or whatever version, whatever iteration we see will succeed or die, and entirely based on how Google treats this service and how they distinguish themselves. But I got to tell you, announcing this slapped together Google Play subscription service days after Apple and with an inferior service is not a good look. It's pathetic, actually.
Well,
I don't know.
And by the way, just because we're about to wrap up the show here, I did want to squeeze in this last article about Microsoft hitting 1 billion Windows devices, which, by the way, I'm trying to skim the article here. I think, so Microsoft previously hit 700 million Windows devices, and by the way, Windows 10 devices, not just Windows devices, Windows 10 devices in September 2018, and I think that Microsoft was kind of hoping they were going to hit this benchmark sometime in like a year or even like a year and a half after they released Windows 10. So I think they're a little late, but they're doing good.
I'll tell you what, though, big asterisk, though, because what qualifies as a Windows 10? Like, technically, your Xbox One is a Windows 10 device,
sure.
but it doesn't play Windows. But it's not a computer. Same with Google, that used to fudge the numbers on Android, but they would also count like microwaves in that number. So you have to be very careful when they talk about this. I wish they would distinguish Windows 10 from Windows 10 like PCs, but they don't do this, and so it's an asterisk.
I guess the reason that they don't is that in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that a Windows 10 branded router or little dinky device, I don't think it's going to cost as much for a subscription as a full-blown Windows 10 PC, but it's still something that Microsoft is going to receive some kind of money for. So
of course
Yeah.
It's kind of like what happened to Java. Remember, Java was supposed to be agnostic platform, and then I think Microsoft bought it from Sun, and then they started forking it. They got sued over it. So it's no, I tell you what, I like Windows 10. It's my favorite operating system of all time. I like it. I'm an evangelist for it. I think Microsoft's done a lot of really good work, and I want to see it continue to be improved.
Yep. So 1 billion devices within the next 6 months. So, hey, you, and by you, I mean everyone out there, you're probably in good company. There's music playing softly in the background. Nathan, we mentioned a couple things that you have over at popzara.com, but in these last minute, what should people look forward to?
Okay, Sega Genesis reviews, podcast reviews for Nintendo Switch Lite, book reviews. We got the sequel to Handmaiden's Tale coming up. Yeah, that's right. They made a sequel in book form. You got to read it. We got a lot of movies. We got a new review for Rambo: Last Blood. It's very bloody. It's very chunky. It's very controversial. You're gonna love it. A lot of cool stuff. Like, it's all there. It's nice, and not a shred of Trump.
Very cool.
So if you want to get away from Trump for a day, come to Popzara. No Trump.
There you go. So everyone, once again, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the show, Nathan, and everyone else out there. Thank you. Tune in tomorrow as we have another great show. I believe we have our cybersecurity expert. I totally know his name. Yeah, tune in tomorrow. Everyone, we'll be back tomorrow, 4 p.m., 5 p.m. Eastern. Yes, Mr. X. Everyone, we'll be back. Everyone, have a great day. Bye.
Bye.